everyone will have a chance later, don't worry. Yeah, well, thank you very much for coming along, and thank you very much for having me on. It's a great honor to speak to people in Los Angeles and the surrounding area, so thanks very much. As you probably suspect, I'm not going to give you a lot of nice, calm, positive news. The first thing I'm going to do is talk about the situation, and then we're going to talk about what to do about it. As you may know, I'm a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion, and I helped to create the talk heading for Extinction and what to do about it. I think I did the original talk 2 years ago, so I'm going to give you a little bit of an update, really. I've spoken to groups probably about 100 times now, and I never quite feel like I communicate effectively. But what I'm going to try and communicate, and maybe this is the main thing, is that the situation isn't bad, right? It's way, way worse than bad. But even worse than that, it's not a situation, right? It's not something out there which is a thing. It's not an issue. It's not a social movement objective, right? The geophysical system of this planet is everything. This is the fundamental thing we're trying to communicate. It affects every aspect of every element of life. It affects every progressive move that's been made over the last 2,000–3,000 years to improve the human condition. This is way, way, way beyond the imagination of our wildest imaginations, right? So don't even pretend that you're going to come out of this session understanding what we're going into, because no one does. All we know is it's beyond terrible. And I'm going to give you a few sort of hints, right, of it. And one of the reasons why people don't get that is because people are told a few figures, but they're not really told what it means. And, well, they're not even told figures. I mean, we've been hearing, some of us, about the climate crisis for 30 years. And the starting of all the discussion is there's a climate problem, but no one really tells you what it is. So one of the big things with Extinction Rebellion is to tell people exactly what it is as much as we can understand it. I think someone's on. Oh, they're muted. Yeah, great. All right, so let's have a inadequate potted history of where we're at. According to NASA data, we're at 1.3 degrees above pre-industrial. The first 9 months of this year were 1.29. So that's the first thing. We're not at 1 degrees above pre-industrial, at 1.3. And it's going up every year effectively. In the first decade of the 21st century, it went up by 0.2. In the last decade, second decade, it was 0.3. So other things being equal, it's going to be more than 0.3 over the next decade. And if you want to do the basic maths, it's always useful to do a bit of back envelope maths. Then it's 1.3 plus 0.3, and that's where we're going to be at 1.6 by 2030. In other words, the whole narrative that the conventional climate change movement has been selling to us, and the whole climate change industry and the NGOs and the diplomats and the politicians and God knows what else, that somehow the Paris Agreement has any reality, is pure and utter bollocks, as they say in Britain. It doesn't exist. Everybody in the industry knows it's fact, right? We're way over 1.5. It's locked in. It's partially locked in because it's too late to stop it, because we're already putting 50 billion tons of CO2 into the atmosphere each year. It's way over locked in because we've got global dimming, which means you've got pollution in the atmosphere. So if we reduce CO2, we're still going to get extra heating. It's way locked in because you can't just stop carbon and stop extra heating. There's this thing called the carbon lag. It takes between 5 and 20 or even 30 years for it to feed through. The upshot of it is is, as the head of the most important think tank in Australia told me 2 or 3 weeks ago, we're going to be heading over 1.5 in around 5 to 7 years time, right? 5 to 7 years time. This is what the experts are saying. You don't need to be a genius. You just look at the figures, right? We're at 1.3. And that means that we're going to be heading up to 2 degrees centigrade by 2040. Now, the important thing to understand about these figures, just to turn around this usual argument given by our corporate friends in America, is yes, these figures are uncertain. They goddamn are uncertain, right? And you know what that means is they could be a lot worse, right? That could be a lot worse. In other words, if the methane that's coming out of the Arctic at the moment, which is exponentially increasing or super exponentially increasing, then it's going to be game over by 2030. So the main scenario is we're heading over 2 degrees before 2040. And one of the reasons for that is because the papers that came out this year have confirmed that the Arctic ice in the summer will be melted regardless of how much we reduce carbon by something around 2035, maybe 2030. That's going to add around ½ a degree to global warming immediately. And obviously, it's also going to create complete chaos for farmers in the Northern Hemisphere because all the weather systems are going to be messed up because the jet stream's all messed up. And we can ask about that if you wish later on. Okay. The other things that we need to understand just to get a grip of the complete hell that we're moving into is the Amazon is 17% cut down, and the latest scientific estimates are that the tipping point where it will completely die back is 20 to 25%. In other words, we're less than 10 years away from the Amazon, which is the lungs of the planet, disappearing, okay? So the lungs of the planet, all these NGOs come up with these nice slogans, don't they? Like, you know, game over for the climate, lungs of the planet. Basically, what we're talking about, as I'll come on to, is an unimaginable level of human suffering, right? That's what they're really saying. So the other thing that we found out this year, which obviously has been known for a while, is regardless of what we do with carbon emissions, the ice on Greenland is going to melt, and at 7 meters of sea level rise locked in, which means every global city, every coastal city around the world is going to have to be evacuated in the next 50 to 100 years. Again, if we're lucky, could be before that. Okay, so that's the figures, right? That's what we're looking at. We're going over 2 degrees. Now, what people don't get told is 2 degrees is actually 5 degrees, right? In California, in the Midwest, in the middle of Canada, it's 5 degrees. It's not 2. 2 is the global average. So 5 degrees starts feeling a little bit tricky, but it's not 5 degrees. That's the average. So it means like 25% of the time, it's like 10 degrees or even 15. And once you get over 30 degrees centigrade, you can't grow food. Okay, so just think about that in terms of California, right? You're talking about 25% of the time is going to be over 40 degrees centigrade. On a really hot day, it'll be 50 degrees centigrade. That's the point at which you suddenly realize how completely off the scale horrendous the situation is. And the latest scientific analysis on it is at 2 degrees centigrade, i.e. in less than 20 years' time, the people that are born today are going to be, what, 17, 18, 19. At that point in their lives, then it's going to be 5 degrees plus in Africa and in the tropics and in Central America and Southeast Asia. And the latest estimates are that will produce 1 billion people who are going to be on the move. So that's 1,000 million people, right? You had 5 million people come out of Syria 2 or 3 years ago into Europe, created a massive crisis. We're not talking about 5 million people, we're talking about 1,000 million people. So this is a euphemism for mass rape, mass slaughter, and mass starvation. That's what we're looking at 2 degrees. 2 degrees is not dangerous, right? 2 degrees is hell. That's what we're looking at, right? We're looking at a massive collapse of the world economic system. We're looking at the end of the prosperity for people in the global north. We're looking at massive social breakdown, and we're looking at mass immigration going on for decade after decade. Okay, so where are we up to in terms of America? Usually I do these talks in Britain, you know, talking to a British audience, but the situation in America is things are already locked in, right? One of the things we need to do is to get out into Los Angeles and tell people Los Angeles is going to be evacuated in the next 2 decades, right? As I'm sure some of you know, and what I've read in the papers is people are already leaving LA, right? Because of the temperature and the knock-on effects of that. Okay, so what we're looking at in the next 20 years is the southwest of the United States turning into desert. We're looking at half the United States becoming semi-uninhabitable, and we're looking at Florida and large parts of the coastline being underwater, right? That's locked in. That's the best scenario, right? That's not some science fiction thing. That's what the scientists say. And I'm not bullshitting you, okay? I'm a co-founder of Extinction Rebellion. I have regular conversations with the world's top scientists. And this is what they say, you know? I mean, that's why I spend all my time doing this stuff, because I'm just overwhelmed with the responsibility to tell people it's already locked in, right? What we're looking at now is whether we lose the whole of the United States or we just lose the southern half. That's the choice, you know, whether everyone has to go to Canada or whether, you know, we have some sort of whatever, right? Use your imagination. Okay, so just give you a little bit more grip on this, right? At 2 degrees centigrade, it's 4 to 5 degrees centigrade in the center of continents. So I've got a bunch of scientists working with me who are researching what that actually means. So what that means is in the American Midwest, wheat production is going to go down by 50% at 4 degrees centigrade. So again, like this, the average, okay, it's uncertain. That means on a bad year, it's going to be 75% of wheat. In a place like India, by 2030, they're not going to be able to grow wheat anymore because they've got the Himalayas in the way. So wheat production in India with 1.3 billion people is going to go down by 60% on an average year. So that's the reason why I went on Hard Talk, which is the biggest sort of current affairs program in the UK, and said 6 billion people are going to die, right? Give or take, who cares? And I spoke to like Peter Carter, who's one of the expert inputters to the IPCC process. And him and a whole bunch of scientists who don't want to make their names known because they're still in the system. They're aware of what's going on and they want you to know what's going on. And what's going on is billions of people are going to starve to death. That's why I asked him. You can watch the video. 50,000 people watched it in the last month, right? Show it to your friends. This is from the horse's mouth. This is from a guy who sat there year after year after year in the IPCC process. And that's what they know. And this brings me on to the other point, right? Which is the people in the establishment, the people in the American military, the diplomats in the State Department, the British establishment, the world diplomats, they all know this, right? Don't think they don't know it. They're not stupid, okay? I mean, we've got a totally schizophrenic situation here where half the time when they talk to the American public, they're saying one thing and behind closed doors, they're saying another. So just give you an example. I think you may know of a guy called Michael Mann. Michael Mann is what, maybe America's most well-known scientist. He had an article, it was in The Guardian in the UK, probably in the US as well. And before Trump won the election, right, he said, if Trump wins the election, it's game over for the climate, right? We know what he means by that, right? He's a nice, posh, middle-class American, right? He's not going to say billions of people are going to die. Just uses this euphemism, it's game over for climate. Why is he saying that? Because he says if Trump wins the election, there'll be no reduction in carbon emissions and by the time you get to the end of 4 years, that's over for Paris, right? It's 15% reduction in carbon a year, according to the official figures. So what he's really trying to imply here is that everyone should vote for Biden, and then that's going to be okay, right? So think about that for a minute. This is what the liberal science establishment is saying, is it's okay. Leave it up to Biden and the Democrats and the corporate state. This is exactly the message which has been given to people for the last 30 years. In the last 30 years, with over 40 international conferences, carbon emissions haven't gone down, they've gone up by 60%. There's not a chance in hell that the American corporate state is going to reduce carbon emissions by 7.5% a year, which is the minimum, right? The minimum that Paris is saying in order to have a 50% chance of 1.5, right? 1.5 is the tipping point that sends our children into hell. That's just a 50% chance. So this is why Extinction Rebellion was set up, right? Because we're out of time and we're out of patience and we don't want to be lied to it anymore. It's a matter of rage and disgust, right, with what's been happening. And that disgust is shown by the other side of the equation, which is no doubt Michael Mann in his private conversations knows it's already game over, right? But he's not going to tell you. So I talked to the head of an international think tank 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he said to me he talked to one of the top members of the British establishment, right, who's a big international figure, right? I'd say like half the people in Britain know who he is. And this man said to him, right, we've got 1 year to persuade the international public that we need to reduce carbon emissions drastically, and 1 year to do something about the Arctic in terms of geoengineering. Otherwise, we've done for, right? This man is at the top of the international global system, but he doesn't have the guts to come on a YouTube channel and say that, right? I know what he says in public, which is we've got a bit of a problem, we're dealing with it, leave it to us, right? Which is the Biden message, as we all know. All right, so the big thing that we're sort of moving on to here is getting beyond environmentalism. What we're doing in Extinction Rebellion is moving on to the idea that, or the reality, that the social collapse we're seeing around us is completely intermeshed with the ecological crisis. There is no longer a split between environmentalism and social justice. They're the same thing, right? And that's not a moral point. It's a fact of social reality. So one of the things we know from the COVID crisis, and I don't need to speak about that, we know what it's like in Los Angeles, right? I've been reading about it today. But one of the interesting things about the COVID crisis is no one knows what to call it. Is it an environmental problem? Or is it a health problem? Is it a political problem? Is it a science problem? Well, it's all of those things, right? Because what we're dealing with is the breakdown of the whole system. And the whole system is predicated on this destruction of nature. And as we all know, COVID is a direct consequence of ecological breakdown around the world, where the interaction between the wild parts of nature and the food supply produce this, the extra likelihood of having pandemics. And David Attenborough, if you saw his program on extinction, said quite clearly, one of the scientists said quite clearly, we're looking at COVID or something worse every 10 years from now, right? This is something that's increasing exponentially. All right, so what I'm trying to communicate here is this isn't something, we're not talking tonight about creating a nice conventional social movement mobilization in Los Angeles or in America, right? We're not talking about there's loads of different issues and then there's climate, right? This isn't 1995, it's not even 2005, it's 2020. We don't have any time to stop and think about this is just another issue, right? It's everything. And not only is it everything, it's increasing exponentially in the dire nature of the threat. And this is what a lot of conventional political people and conventional activists don't quite get, right? Like, and quite understandably in a way. Like with most problems over the last 200 years, just about all of them, you're basically dealing with a linear problem. You know, you've got racism this year, you've got racism next year. You've got the bosses screwing the workers last year, and you've got them doing it again this year, right? You've got, you know, a problem with pollution last year, and you've got a problem with pollution this year. In other words, it's dire, right? The problems you're dealing with are dire, but they're not getting exponentially worse. You see what I'm saying? What we're saying with the climate is, if we leave it another 2 years, that's it, right? We can't drag it back. We're looking at billions of deaths, right? Or maybe it's 4 years, or maybe it was 4 years ago. No one really knows, but we know we haven't got any time. And not only is it exponential, it's existential, right? This is it. This isn't a problem in Central America. It's not a problem in Florida. It's not a problem, you know, in southern China. It's everywhere, which is why I'm on this call, right? Because everyone's in the same boat at the end of the day. So, you know, I want you to go away after this talk, and there's one thing you do is to look in the mirror and say existential and exponential, right? They're great, nice, long academic words, but it means it's everything and it's getting worse at an exponential rate. And that's why we need to completely reconsider what we're trying to do here. And that brings us on to what Extinction Rebellion is all about. I think the important thing to understand is Extinction Rebellion is based upon a very old ethical idea, which is if you live in truth, then that's the highest virtue, right? And what we've had for 30, 40 years from the NGO sector and from political parties, as we're all aware, is expediency. What will be useful in order for us to be successful? What will be useful in order for us to make money? What will be useful to get us the vote, right? Every conventional political force in the Western world is based upon that principle. And Extinction Rebellion came along. It was created by 15 heretics, right, from the left. And we all made that decision that we were going to tell the general public the absolute truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And loads of people said to us, as you can imagine, you can't do that. You can't talk to people about extinction. You'll put them off. You'll upset them. You know, you'll depress them, right? You can't talk to people about rebellion. That's too radical. Who knows what rebellion means, right? It's an old-fashioned word. It's too aggressive, blah, 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 right? We said, fuck that. We're going to do it anyway, you know, regardless of how successful we are, because that's what the truth is. And surprise, surprise, within 12 months, we've become the largest social movement in British history with 200,000 sign-ups. Why do you think that was? Because millions of people actually want to know what's going on, right? You know, it's that same thing when you've got a lump in your body and you deny it, you deny it, and you deny it. And at some point you want to go to the doctor and you want to give someone to give you a straight answer. And thousands of people have been to talks like this tonight because they want to know what's going on, right? You, at a certain point, you want to know what's going on, even if it's the worst possible news, because you're fed up of living in denial. So that's the first thing about Extinction Rebellion, which is new. The second thing about Extinction Rebellion is it's not a science talk, right? It's not about communication. It's not about, hey guys, after this talk, you know, go away and give your £3 a month to XR, right? I mean, we've had hundreds and thousands of those sort of presentations. It's being truthful about the science and also brutally truthful about what has to be done, right, at this point in history. And on that question, there's a no-brainer answer. Across all of human history, when people become serious about changing society in the minimum amount of time, there is only ever one answer, which is resistance. civil resistance. So we're saying that to people not because it's an option, not because it's a theory of change, but because that's the only thing left at this point. There is no chance in a million years that the Biden administration is going to reduce carbon emissions by anything like 7.5% a year, even if we were going to pretend that that was going to sort it out, without mass civil resistance. And mass civil resistance is not complicated, right? I mean, we talk all the time about a climate emergency. The nature of a climate emergency, the nature of an emergency is it's not complicated. When your house is on fire and you've got your kids on the top floor, you're not sitting around considering your options, right? You're not considering whether it's moral or not to take action. There's one course of action. You run at the door, you break down the door, you run up the stairs, you get the kids and you take them out, right? You're not going to go around the back door. You're not going to ring up the police force, right? You're not going to go and see your neighbors. You do it because it's a life and death situation. And when people become serious about annihilation, which is what we're facing, then they rebel in a classical sense. Now, there's lots of people in Extinction Rebellion who moved into Extinction Rebellion who want to take it back to an NGO-esque orientation, right? i.e., we've got plenty of time and it's not really that bad. That's not the case. It's a lie. We haven't got any time and it's beyond bad. And what that concretely means is civil resistance. And civil resistance concretely means two things: getting arrested and going to prison. And as we all know, in the 20th century, the civil resistance, civil disobedience mechanism was perfected by Gandhi and Martin Luther King. So what we've done in Britain is nothing original, right? We've borrowed from America, America borrowed from India, India borrowed from Thoreau. You know, it's a big global merry-go-round. Civil resistance isn't rooted in any one particular culture because it's worked in all political cultures. So I think Will's going to talk about what that concretely means for Los Angeles. But I just want to finish by saying again that this is a global situation, right? Extinction Rebellion was the #1 influencer within 12 months of setting up because of this approach, the brutal willingness to tell people the truth and the willingness to enter into civil resistance. Okay, and it's in whatever, 70 countries now and all the rest of it. And I've been criticized quite a lot in coming to the United States, right, by various people to tell Americans to get their shit together, right? And the reason I'm doing that is because America is central. This isn't an American problem, right? It's not, hey, we've got a problem in the south of California. We've got a problem in Wales. I'm a Welsh farmer for 20 years. I've been growing food for 30 years. And in Wales, you cannot consistently grow food anymore, right? In the last 10 years, we've had massive flooding, massive droughts. And that's destroyed the basis of the horticultural industry in Wales, just as the horticultural industry is being destroyed in California. And the problem is getting exponentially worse. We know that. Forest fires in California were what, 2 million acres? 2 years later, they're 4 million acres, right? You know, in 20 years' time, they're going to be 10 million acres. We all already know from the science in Australia that 20% of the trees burnt down this year. That's going to be an average year by the time someone born today is a teenager. An average year. So people are going to be evacuating from Australia. This is a global situation. You can talk to me about my story, why my business was destroyed. I used to employ 25 people, now I employ 3, right? If you talk to a farmer anywhere around the world, they'll tell you the same story. They're not going to tell you why it happened, but they all are shitting themselves because they don't know what's happening. So that's how I want to leave it, really. I think, yeah, Will's going to talk about what's going to happen next. But I'm really appealing to you without sounding too self-humiliating, right? You know, guys, you're America, you're the most important country in the world still, dare I say it? You know, welcome to responsibility. It's not about LA, right? It's not even about you. It's about the whole world and our legacy to our children and to all the children around the world, to the people in Wales, the people in Australia, the people in India, right? This is it. So let's get to it. That's it.
Thank you, Rob.